We're going to be taking a look at the above variation, and we're going to fast forward it all the way to move number 11, where white is going to be faced with somewhat of a conundrum, where it has to make a decision as far as what it wants to do. That's obviously after it took the lead in material here by capturing they're actually capturing both of the knights after this exchange right here. Now black decides to come through with the check fork right there. And the question is, how does white get out of this check fork and put pressure and try to win the game? Okay, we have this check fork here, and we're looking at ways to break out of it. One way is this pawn right here. We could advance it forward 2 squares. But what exactly does that accomplish? Because the queen can just go in, capture it, and still put pressure on the king and put pressure on white's pieces. And of course, they win material there. Another option is to move the bishop forward and protect the king. And what that will do is still result in this piece being vulnerable up top here. However, having the bishop in place will make the bishop more mobile. In addition to that, the rook will also have an open lane potentially if it moved 3 squares over or 2 squares over. A third option is to simply move the queen forward right there. Now that protects the king, but it still leaves the pawn hanging. And our last option is just to move the king to one of those 2 flight squares. Again, this still leaves the pawn hanging and does not develop any pieces. So of the options we have available, apparently I would say the bishop looks to be the best. Even though it leaves the pawn hanging, it has a number of different options. Well, the queen is certainly a possibility too, and we obviously don't want to do the king, because that doesn't really help us at all. So we go ahead and we move the bishop forward, and the queen recaptures there. Now we have a problem when we have this knight that's in trouble. Now what we want to do is we want to figure out a way to get out of that if we can, without losing position and so forth and retreating the knight. So the question is, can white bring enough pressure with its mobile pieces? We talk about mobile pieces, we talk about the rook, the knight, even though it's kind of trapped right now, the bishop, the queen, and of course the other bishop. So can white bring enough pressure with its mobile pieces? Now if we look closer at the board, we'll notice that black's king does not have a lot of options. In fact, it has 2 options. So if we can bring enough pressure on black's king where black has to move the king out of check, we can save our knight. So we go ahead and we move the bishop forward to the b5 square, put the king in check, and black now has a couple of options. One option is we can take the queen and just simply capture the b5 bishop, but that can be recaptured by the knight, which is not a good trade for black. The other option for black is simply to take its bishop and defend with it and trade off bishops potentially. So black decides to do that. And we decide to capture the bishop, put the king in check, king recaptures. Now, white still has a problem in that basically its d4 knight is still hanging. What white needs to do is either retreat the knight and go into a cubbyhole, or figure out a way to go on the attack and protect the knight as well. And if you draw diagonal lines and horizontal lines, we'll notice that they all correspond to the a4 square, which is a perfect place for the queen to move to and put the king in check, which we'll do there. And now black's king is in check. Black's king obviously has to move out of check. Now the next option is, what can white do? Well, one option is to take the bishop and put the king in check. Another option is to take the knight and put the king in check. And the third option, obviously, is to take the rook and put the king in check. Now, of all 3 options, the rook appears to be the best because it removes the king's flight squares. So we're going to go ahead and move the rook onto the c1 square to put the king in check there. Now the king is in check. The king has to move, which it does. And that leaves white with a couple of options. One option is to take the knight and put the king in check. But there's a problem with an option in that there's a defender. Well, there's actually two defenders. One defender is a pawn. So white's going to have to figure out a way to remove the defender. And one way white can do that is to take the bishop, which happens to correspond on the angles, and basically put the king in check with the bishop. So white decides to go ahead and put, or we decide to go ahead and put the king in check with a bishop there. And well, basically black does not have a lot of options here. Black decides to block with a pawn, and that leaves the knight open to put black's king in check. Black's king is in check. Black's king has to move. Now white simply takes the knight here and produces a discovered check. And a discovered check is interesting in that it gives white a number of different options. There's not a lot of good ways to defend this. Black decides to defend it with a queen, and there's nothing to defend the queen. Now black is in check again, and as you can see, this game is pretty much over. White's queen moves ahead to the d7 square for checkmate, and now the game is officially over. This essentially wraps up how you can use a combination of techniques, anywhere from discovery, mobile pieces, putting pressure where you put your opponent in check. It essentially limits the moves to their king's flight squares, or putting defensive pieces in place to get out of check. Hopefully this video was a help to you. Thank you for watching.